topic is pyrexia of unknown origin. All of us know, both physicians, pediatricians, general practitioners know that pyrexia of unknown origin is a difficult thing to crack. So actually it will be a headache for the physician and later it may turn out to be a nightmare. So we do not know the approach. When the patient comes to you, you are actually like a blind man looking at an elephant. So we don't know what should be the approach. It should be meticulous. Now for that we have Dr. Radha, HOD Medicine, Kottayam. Over to Radha.
Thank you, sir, and a very good afternoon to you all. Pranams to the chairperson who has taught me most of what I know about fever, and also to Murli sir, who has been my teacher for a short time. So most of what I have to say have been covered by the previous speakers, and although medicine has advanced so much, approach to pyrexia of unknown origin is still the same as what I have been learning during my MD days. Few investigations have come up, but the use is to be done judiciously. I can see Purushothaman sir shaking his head, agreeing with me. I'm sure he has seen more number of PUOs than me. So here we go. These are the four aspects of what I shall be talking about. Define PUO, just to differentiate, and what investigations to do, and how to decide on the treatment. Post-COVID, pre-COVID has not made any much difference to the investigations or management of PUOs. Now, way back in 1961, this definition was proposed by Petersdorf and Beeson, and it still stands good, except for a few modifications. The next modification as of today is the fever degree is the same, the duration is the same. No known immunocompromised state has been added. We have seen the previous speakers talking about fever in an immunocompromised host, and this has been added to the present diagnosis. That is, the diagnosis remains uncertain after certain obligatory investigations. And a list of the obligatory investigations as given in textbooks is this. So even though we know that many a time ESR or CRP may not give us a clue, but it is a mandatory investigation. So complete CBC, ESR, CRP and a urine analysis, liver, renal functions, electrolytes, CPK and LDH, ferritin, ANA, rheumatoid factors and protein electrophoresis, blood cultures properly taken, at least 3 cultures should be done, X-ray chest and USG, and finally they have given tuberculin test or IGRAS. So after doing all these obligatory tests and after completing 3 weeks, still if there is no clue, then we call it as a PUO. Now let us see over the years, right from 1913 to 2015, these are some of the studies that have been taking place in various parts of the world, from Boston, United States to Asia, Europe, Netherlands, Belgium, London, and the case definitions were either as per the original definition or the one which came later. If you go to the diagnostic categories, you can still see that at least 38 to 40% of the cases are still infections. And next comes your neoplasms, and at least 1/4 of the cases are still undiagnosed after all these investigations. That hasn't changed over the years. Now this is a study that is quoted mostly from Western literature, and so these are the various causes. If you look at Harrison, there are 2 pages full of causes of FUO, and it is not fair to represent the whole page here. It is not unnecessary. Mainly these are the 5 categories that we must include and suspect: infections, non-infectious inflammatory diseases, neoplasms, and the miscellaneous group where your venous thrombosis, pulmonary embolism, aortic dissections, all those things come up, and the disorders with your hypothalamus where you have your neuroleptic malignant syndrome, etc. Of the infections, still more than 50% is tuberculosis. And of the malignancies, the commonest is still lymphoma. And this non-infectious inflammatory disorders are coming up in a big way. And the commonest one to present as PUO is adult onset Still's disease. So the pattern is the same whether it is done in the United States or over in India. Now let us see some of the studies in India. There were 3 studies which I could find where the relative proportion of the infections remains the same. Malignancies, almost the same. Non-infectious inflammatory diseases, again, comparable. Only thing is the last category of undiagnosed fevers, in one study it was 14% and the last one is 1.6%, and that was done by Priscilla Rupali from CMC Vellore. And obviously that is one of our last resorts for sending a patient with a PUO. So the undiagnosed category depends on your hospital, diagnostic facilities, and the persons who are investigating the patient. So first thing is admit the patient and confirm that there is fever by measuring the temperature. Now this has been taught to be by all my teachers right from my days in pediatrics to medicine, because that rules out all your fictitious fevers and other things, fraudulent fevers, fictitious fevers. Elicit history repeatedly. All the speakers before me and all the cases Rajesh has presented tell you why it is so important to ask the history. History of residence and travel, occupation, pets and hobbies. Now pets in the form of cats, dogs, birds, camels. Once we had a patient who was a Gulf returnee presenting with fever, and when we thought of a Gulf returnee, we thought he had a very prestigious occupation there. But after asking repeatedly, he revealed to one of our nursing staff that he was tending to camels there. And he turned out to be brucellosis. So it is important that we ask the history repeatedly, different persons, different times, because I'm sure all my teachers will agree, some histories are revealed when you ask repeatedly or when the patient has gained your confidence. We had a postgraduate student who elicited the history of bestialism when he was admitted to PU. None of us got that history. So it all depends on repeated history taking and repeated encounters. And drugs, Sheila Madam has already given you the details. Treatment details, I need not emphasize. And family history is also very important. Now, this has been driven into me right from my undergraduate days, potentially diagnostic clues. So the PDCs, look at the patient from head to foot. Look at the front, the back, look at the eyes, look at the genitalia, and repeatedly examine the patient for all these things. So at the time of admission, you may not have any of these PDCs. They can come up at any time during the hospital stay. So repeated examination for these clues. But still, 50% of these PDCs may be misleading, but if you don't have anything to go by, please use these clues as a source for investigation. So if the patient says there is unintentional weight loss, you know what you're looking for. Drenching night sweats. Very few diseases have these drenching night sweats. Headache, visual loss, jaw claudication, and prominent temporal arteries, palpable temporal arteries. Think of giant cell arteritis. high fever, arthralgia, and rashes, suspect stills. And if there is a facial rash with a fever in a young patient, especially female, think of SLE. A right lower quadrant abdominal pain, changing bowel habits, could be tuberculosis or Crohn's or even a malignancy. Look specifically for tender nodules on the skin. Look at the gums and the teeth. Look at the jugular veins. Palpate the jugulars to look for tenderness along the jugulars. And make the patient stand up and look for engorged veins at the back and on the abdomen. Never forget to examine the testicles. As you see in Rajesh's case, there was a epididymoarchitis which could be the clue for your diagnosis. Dairy exposure has been emphasized enough by my two previous speakers. Cats and dogs, mostly we think of toxoplasma, but one of my esteemed teachers, Dr. Ganapati Rao, always talks of a man who came with history of fever, and his veterinary doctor diagnosed the problem because his dog had died of distemper and this man had caught the disease. He always says, you even ask for history from vets, and that vet was his son-in-law, I think. Look for lymphadenopathy, history of immobilization, and changing murmurs is, again, even though it is a very subtle sign, the importance can never be underestimated. And the last one, the so-called relative bradycardia, even though we used to say that it is specific for certain fevers, now there are about 100 causes for that. So it has lost its significance, but it may still be useful if you are suspecting some of these diseases. Now I have taken this algorithm from one of the Indian journal, because all the Western literature goes with the algorithms for PUO. Now, the first step is rule out immunosuppression and document the fever. And also rule out drug usages, stop steroids if the patient is using them. And now again look carefully for localizing signs and symptoms. The basic investigations, apart from all those tests, the obligatory investigations as given by Harrison, in India, we must look at the malarial parasite also. So again, you are suspecting the major three categories of treatable diseases like infections, malignancies, and always think of non-infectious inflammatory disorders. Next, you have certain system pointer PDCs. So look for anorexia, weight loss, look for anemia nodes, probably you have a reticuloendothelial system involved. Cough, do the investigations for tuberculosis, and if you are not getting a clue, do a CT, look for lymph nodes, and if necessary, go for biopsy under radiology guidance. Headache, do CT or MRI if necessary. CSF study is mandatory. It is not always necessary to do a CT prior to CSF, except when you have raised ICT or focal neurological deficits. If you have a diarrhea, examine the stool, do the CT abdomen, and go for the diagnosis. So if there are any other symptoms, then think of the system that is getting involved and then investigate in a rational manner. Now, as I said, the first thing, the anemia, hepatosplenomegaly lymphadenopathy, could be a neoplasm where you go for the lymph node biopsy or the bone marrow biopsy. CT abdomen and thorax has also come into the set of investigations. If you have multi-system involvement, probably it is a non-infectious inflammatory disorder, and do the collagen vascular workup. If the patient is stable, do not investigate randomly. Investigate only for the clinical signs that you develop. This is very important, especially when you are thinking of a collagen vascular disease, Please do not do a whole body investigation of the antibodies or the ELISAs or whatever bug that is available. They will mislead you and it will give you a wrong diagnosis, and the most often it may not be the cause for the fever. So if the patient is unstable, well and good. If the patient is stable, please wait. Now these are some of the clinical examinations which are important. Look at the skin for erythema nodosum. Ocular examination is a very important sign. So on that side is a eye for uveitis. The fundus examination, I would say it is a lost art nowadays. What with COVID and otherwise, we are not looking at the fundus anymore, and we are not teaching our students to look at the fundus, but it will give you a lot of information, especially in the case of a PUO. So there you are seeing a Roth spot with a few hemorrhages, and you can get umpteen number of information from your fundus examination. And Osler's nodes, Janeway lesions, and that is the eschar that we were talking about. Especially look for it in the submammary fold and in the scrotal region. And it is not very common in our areas, but like Sheila Madam was saying, in Trivandrum we have a lot of cases of scrub typhus. We have scrub typhus, but we don't have much of the skin manifestations. And the rash that you see is a salmon pink rash of adult onset Still's disease. Now, since I was asked to talk about fever in a post-COVID situation, I would like to present one patient who came to us. It is not in the post-COVID era, it is during the COVID era itself. So this was a 23-year-old nurse who had category A COVID in 2020. She did not have any symptoms. She was kept in home isolation and she was asymptomatic for 3 weeks. So by the middle of December 2020, she started having fever. Fever with loose stools, red eyes and some rashes. I will show you the pictures. All the system examinations at that point were normal. See, that was the red eye that she had, and the plantar erythema. Similar erythema was also noted in the hands. So this was on day 3 of the fever. And baseline investigation showed neutrophilic leukocytosis and an elevated CRP. All the other tests seemed normal. An echo was done, which was also normal. But this is something which I disagree. On day 3 of a fever with no focus, the patient was started on a piperacillin and metronidazole from a peripheral hospital, which is a little strange because the patient was not toxic at that time. She did not have any hypotension, bradycardia or any other signs. And as Netto said, fever is not ceftriaxone deficiency, and we used to be told specifically that starting metronidazole should be done only after you examine the stool and find the motile amoeba in that. So here 2 high-end antibiotics have been started and the patient was referred with history of non-relenting fever. But subsequently, this patient developed hypotension. That is around the day 5 or 6 of fever. Even at that time, there were no significant respiratory symptoms or a hypoxia. And this is a multi-system involvement. So abdominal involvement with hypotension, skin involvement in the post-COVID phase 3 weeks after category A COVID. We were suspecting a post-COVID inflammatory syndrome. A repeat echo was done which showed a global hypokinesia suggestive of myocarditis. And then these investigations were asked for and all the inflammatory markers came positive. So this proved to be a multi-system inflammatory disease of the adult. And then the patient was started on immunoglobulins and steroids, and she became febrile in 2 days, and the patient was discharged after 7 days, continued on steroids which were tapered and stopped. So this was a scenario that we found during the COVID era. I'm sure many of the hospitals have reported similar cases, especially in children, but adults also this can happen. And we did not do any COVID antibody test as the patient had already had a history of COVID. So that is to reiterate the importance of suspecting these unusual manifestations in this post-COVID era. Now, this case too, we had a diagnosis, but we were stumped because the patient was not responding. This was a 42-year-old male patient who had actually donated liver for his brother 2 years back. No known immunocompromise. He had a fever and a headache with meningeal signs. The CSF study initially showed a lymphocytic pleocytosis with elevated proteins. And CSF pressure was elevated. The ADA levels were low and CBNAT was negative, but still our clinical diagnosis was TB meningitis, and the patient was accordingly started on the anti-tuberculous treatment. The fever refused to abate and the headache continued. The patient kept on vomiting. We did repeat CSF, repeated imaging of the brain which showed only meningeal enhancement. We sought for sources of tuberculosis elsewhere by doing a CT abdomen and a CT chest, which were normal. Other investigations of the CSF, which could cause a lymphocytic pleocytosis, were all negative. Repeated HIV was negative, CD4 was normal, and the patient in between developed hematemesis, and temporarily we had to stop the ATT and continue parenteral steroids under cover of anti-cerebral edema measures. We consulted Netto, and together again we continued our investigations, gave him a trial of antibiotics, sent all cultures, evaluated repeatedly for other conditions like infective endocarditis. Even after 1.5 months of investigations, nothing new came up. So we slowly restarted the ATT, and in another 2-3 weeks' time, this patient's fever subsided and his headache came down. So what Sheila Madam said stands to reason. The uncommon manifestations of a common disease are commoner than the rare manifestations. The rare manifestation of a common disease is commoner than the common manifestation of an uncommon disease. And we believe this could be a tuberculous meningitis. Still, the patient is coming for follow-up and he's free of symptoms. So, what next to do once the initial tests are negative? We have ruled out factitious fever, excluded drug fever. Again, keep on reassessing all your potentially diagnostic clues. 50 to 80% may still be misleading. One test which can be done is cryoglobulins, fundus examination. I have already said it remains a lost art. And this FDG PET CT scan is superior to all the other tests like FDG PET or simple gallium scanning. This will tell you where the infection is, but not what the infection is. But from that, you can go on and do necessary biopsies, either of the lymph nodes, bone marrow, or temporal arteries. And this gallium scanning, I am reminded of a case Sharma sir had thought it would be his, one of our professors of urology was admitted with fever, and I was a postgraduate student at that time. Sir used to weigh 120 kgs and he knew all the nuances of what a fever, like 1 month fever, means. He would not refuse, he would not allow us to examine. Sharma, innu venda, enikku vayya. And we thought he would definitely be having a malignancy. Finally, we sent him to Vellore, where gallium scanning showed a prostatic abscess. So These are the vagaries of medicine. And some of the good practice points are, again and again I reiterate, ensure a good history, a thorough examination, and the baseline investigations. Now, in this era of artificial intelligence, a good history can be easily taken by a person who is not a doctor. A computer will give you a good history, but where you score is when you examine the patient properly and plan your investigations. And always consider non-infectious causes. A positive MANTO or an IGRA does not mean tuberculosis. It just means that there is a tubercle exposure. It does not mean that the fever is due to tuberculosis. Do not give empirical antibiotics or steroids unless there is a sufficient cause. And unnecessary and unwarranted serological tests may lead you to a wrong path. And PET CT scan, wherever available, use it judiciously. It is a costly investigation. It will help you to localize the site of the problem. And lastly, that patient must be aware that after all this paraphernalia, we may not get a clue for the fever. The patient should be taken into our confidence. And the situations where you can start antibiotics or steroids is when you have a febrile neutropenia, when the patient is hemodynamically unstable, when there is a site-threatening arthritis, and these are the fever modulating agents like colchicine and interleukin inhibition, which you can try in autoinflammatory syndromes, which are very, very, very rare. So the take-home message is, have a low threshold for referring the patient, and the last physician always has the last laugh. He is the one who is going to get the most acclaim. 5 പേരെടുത്ത് പോയി ആരും കണ്ടുപിടിച്ചില്ല. But 6th person will find out. That is the usual story of a patient with a PUO. So do not hesitate to ask a second opinion and refer to a higher center whenever needed, especially centers where you have intensive, invasive investigation facilities available. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Radha, for excellent presentation. You highlighted many important things. Particularly, you have said in the last, PET scan doesn't give the diagnosis. It only tells you what to look for. You have to look at the SUV, standardized uptake value, and if it is more than 9 or so, you have to take that biopsy. Even if it is intact, you have to do inside the abdomen, you have to take laparoscopy and then do it. If it is low, it may not yield. And similarly, ask opinion even from the house surgeons. That is very, very important. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Radha madam, for that wonderful that approach to PUO. So I could spend 2 months with her. So this is one case which disturbed us a lot. So this was a 60-year-old male coming from somewhere near Vadakkancheri, near Thrissur. Actually came with fever of 9 months duration, loss of weight, right and left upper quadrant abdominal pain of 9 months duration. No other focal symptoms or to suggest any symptoms. On examination, he had a palpable liver which was 6 centimeter and spleen palpable 4 centimeter from the left coxa margin. There was no lymphadenopathy and patient had anemia also. And you can look that patient was a bit hyperpigmented, but the problem was he was a chronic alcoholic and he was diagnosed to have chronic liver disease from a local hospital and he was under follow from a physician from there. You can note that in the investigations there is anemia and WBC is too low. Total count was 2000, platelet count was 91,000. So there is a disparity. So platelet is not much affected compared to total count. Now ESR was 100 and sodium was 126, and in the LFT you can see the total protein albumin. There is a significant AG reversal. Total protein was 8 and albumin was 1.8, and one important LFT clue in a PO is alkaline phosphatase. So ALP was 345. So we evaluated in your usual lines: chronic infections, malignancies. Lymphoma workup done, turned out negative. tuberculosis negative, HIV negative, when brucella negative, and finally what happened, we thought it's some kind of lymphomas, and we proceeded with imaging, that also turned negative, and we did a bone marrow for the first time. So you can see that the first bone marrow done was showing only erythroid hyperplasia. So we thought it is due to hypersplenism, the patient is having spleen, but you couldn't explain the fever. So what happened, he was kept under follow. He was reasonably okay. He was not running fevers. Actually, he had no documented fevers after admission. He left him a follow-up after around 2 weeks of hospital stay. Again, he came back with dropping counts. We did another bone marrow. So prolonged fever, weight loss, and hepatosplenomegaly and pancytopenia. So what could be the cause? So actually we did 3 bone marrows in this patient. All the 3 bone marrows came as erythroid hyperplasia, and the third marrow come as lymphoplasmacytic infiltrate. The same thing I saw with thing. And in the third, the possibility of visceral leishmaniasis was also kept after discussing with HOD in Calicut. And he told the possibility, and even to start empirical amphotericin, but we had some issues from the department, so we couldn't do that. So we kept him under follow-up, but he was loosening his clothes and he was losing weight daily, and he was kept under follow-up. So what next? So that will be after Netto's talk. So I invite Dr. Netto